The following program is a production of UNC-TV and the North Carolina Arboretum.
Funding for this program is made possible in part by UNC-TV members.
The special relationship between humans and nature has always inspired us. We have celebrated and expressed our experience of the natural world in sculpture and dance, music and verse, throughout the ages. Bonsai is another vehicle for this expression. In Bonsai, we express our experience of nature using living nature itself in the form of plants. Through an intimate exchange between the plant and the person who grows the plant, a unique individual creation emerges. It is a subtle blending of horticulture and art, human and plant. The world of bonsai is miniature. The natural world that it evokes is boundless. Bonsai is the living art that expresses in miniature an experience of nature. Bonsai is nature reflective. Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Arthur Joura, the bonsai curator here at the North Carolina Arboretum in scenic Asheville. We're talking about bonsai, and we have here a nice specimen from the Arboretum's collection. I would think of this as very, very presentable as a bonsai, but I wouldn't say it's finished. In the bonsai sense of the word, finished means the plant is dead, because as long as it's alive, it's growing and it's changing, and so you as the grower have to work with it. If you have a plant that is at this level of completion, your job is to maintain primarily. You want to maintain its health, of course, but we're also looking at maintaining the general shape. We've built the tree that we want. Our job now is to just fill it out and refine it, maintain. Very, very different from if we're working with a plant like this. If you remember in the previous program, we talked about starting out, and we talked about starting out with a seedling or a cutting and then growing it on through different stages. That is exactly how this tree came into being. We started out with a seedling. We grew it for a while in a small pot, then transferred it to the ground. We grew it for several years in the ground. Then it was dug up and it was introduced to container culture, and we used one of those large wooden boxes like we saw in the other program. And it spent several years in that. Only this spring did it make the jump into a bonsai container. So now the roots have been worked on to the point where they fit comfortably in this container. We've developed a nice trunk on it. It's got some size. We've played out our branch structure so that we have fullness. What we're working on now is the top. We're still developing the top of the tree. You'll notice that there is wiring on some of the branches there and here, and that's helping still to set the branches exactly where we want them to be. We're growing the top. There's rather too much foliage at present, but we trim, keep trimming back. And over time, we pick and choose which parts we choose to keep. We're developing the crown. We're still working on this tree, still training it. It may be that you don't want to go through the trouble of starting from a seedling, or maybe for some reason you feel you don't have time to do that and you'd like to fast forward a little bit. You can actually go to a bonsai nursery and purchase a plant very much like this one that already has years of development in it. Or you may choose to get a plant like this. This is a collected plant. It was dug up out of the landscape. It's a Mugo Pine. Somebody had this in their yard. It was probably a big spreading plant at that time, but somebody thought that this hefty trunk would be very useful for bonsai. So they dug it up, they chased it back, they got it to grow successfully in a pot. And at that point, it's a saleable item. You as the grower would buy this plant now and then begin to work with it in a design sense. You would look at what you have to work with and you would put together what you think might be a good form to grow this tree in. And so you jump ahead again. You start off at an advanced point and you build your tree from here. This is a very nice item which takes a long time to develop, a trunk this thick. That's what you'll pay for. You do it yourself and it takes longer, or you can buy something that has time already invested in it, but you pay for it. It's your choice. Today, we're going to do a workshop, and we're going to work on a nice old plant, something that's rather unusual, something that you couldn't go to a bonsai nursery and purchase. I'll tell you more about that plant in just a moment, but I want to introduce the tools that we'll be using today. These are the standard bonsai tools that I carry in my toolkit, and I use these on a regular basis, day in, day out, working with our collection. Over here we have cutting tools. These are used up on the crown of the tree, cutting branches, cutting stems, and so forth. For the light work, we have shears. For the heavier things, we have these concave cutters, which can take a bigger caliper piece of wood. If we come across something that's heavier than they can handle, we have this folding saw. That should take care of anything that we have to deal with on a bonsai. These tools here are pliers and cutters, smaller pliers, smaller cutters. And they're used in working with wire. The wire is a training device, and we've looked a little bit at that already. Here we have aluminum wire. This is what people are commonly using now. It's easy to manipulate. It's been coated to make it look like copper. Copper is the traditional material, and that's what this is. If you look, you'll see that we have several gauges of wire running from the very thin to the very thick. We use them according to need on thick and thin branches. This is our subject for today's demonstration, and this is a really, really nice tree. I can say with certainty that this tree is more than 30 years old. The gentleman who donated it to us collected it from his home landscape as a one-year seedling, and he spent 30 years developing what you see here. It's taken that long to build up this flaky bark on the trunk, which is a very nice feature. This is a native plant. It's an eastern white pine. Many people will tell you that the eastern white pine is not very good for bonsai. Don't listen to them. It's just challenging. The plant has its own charming characteristics, but it's a challenge to work with. One thing, it's kind of leggy, which you see in this plant, long stretches without a whole lot of foliage. Also, it can take forever to build up trunk size, and this one, 30 years old, still does not have a very big trunk. Also, up in the top of the tree, it's rather thinned out. It takes a long time for this to build up any kind of density in the foliage. We're going to work with that. We're going to work with all those things. We're going to use the wire. We may do some heavy pruning on this plant to pull it in. And we're going to look at the container it's in, because I have a feeling that we could get a better effect out of a different container. This tree is going to change substantially in the workshop. Okay, if we're going to work on this plant, the first thing we have to do is create some room for ourselves. Let's push some of these aside, spread out a little bit. Now, you have to understand, as I start work on this plant, what you're seeing is the actual physical work. But preceding that, for a period of more than a year, I've been looking at this plant and thinking about it, looking and thinking, looking and thinking. For one thing, I'm very, very respectful of the grower who gave us this plant. As I said, he invested 30 years of his time in shaping this, in developing what we see here today. I need to be respectful of that, because anything I change now is altering what he invested in the plant. That's okay. So great is my respect for him that I called him on the phone yesterday and asked and said, this is what I'd like to do, and he said, please, do what you think is best. This is the nature of bonsai, constant change. Even though this is the form it's been in for many years, we're now going to change it. And forever after this moment, it will look different. It will have a different appearance. I need to drop this down. It's a little bit high for me right now to reach up there and work. So I'll take the tree and the turntable and put it down here. And now you can see what I was saying before about the top is very thin. There's not a lot of foliage there. It takes a long time for the foliage to develop. You'll notice that on the lower pads, there's quite a few needles. certainly many more than you have up here. And that's because this limb has been existent longer. It's had more time to develop. This will catch up over time, but that's what it will take. It will take time, and it doesn't happen quickly. There are a couple of little buds here that are started. Very encouraging things. We'll see more of them as time goes by, and eventually this will fill out. The first thing I want to do is chase back. I've been saying that this is kind of leggy, and it is, and we need to shorten it. And the way I do that is I start looking for the furthest out extremities of the plant, and I look to see if there's something back behind them that I can cut back to. So I'm shortening, but I'm shortening back to something that exists. If I take a piece like this and I cut it like so, nothing will grow out of here. You need to leave something green behind. On a pine tree, there are other plants where we could cut it harder and something new would grow off of the old wood. But on this old pine tree, we need to be very respectful and make sure we cut back to something that already exists. Okay, we've thinned this out quite a bit. I've worked extensively in here, and just a little bit up here. This has less to give, so I'm not going to take so much away from right here. But here and here, I've removed quite a bit. I have not touched this, and that is because I've reached a decision that this is going to get the ultimate thinning out, in that it's going to be removed. I'm going to pick this plant up now and put it on the table so I can work at the proper height. And the first thing I'm going to do is remove the greater part of the branch. It always feels a little sad doing something like that. This is a major portion of the tree that took a long, long time to get to where it is. But I do it with the certainty that in the end, the effect of the tree is going to be better. The look of the tree is going to be better. Well, how do we deal with this remaining piece right here? We may want to preserve part of it and use it as an embellishment or an accent on the tree. And we would leave it there, not in its current form, which is a stub, but we would go ahead and strip the bark off of it and leave it as a piece of exposed dead wood. What I'm doing now is I'm taking the cutter and I'm kind of wrapping my way around and cutting the bark. I'm not cutting the wood, I'm just cutting the bark in a complete ring around the remains of that branch. Okay. Next, I'll take a pair of pliers and I'll squeeze this. And what we're doing is we're getting the bark to slip now off of the wood. And there we see it starting to come away. This is the part where people wonder, oh, are you hurting the tree? It certainly doesn't look pleasant, I know that. But plants don't have a central nervous system. If plants feel things, they certainly don't feel it the same way that we do. And again, if plants can feel this, then it's a fortunate thing for all of us that they have no voices, because every time we started up the lawnmower, there would be endless screaming. I need to grab hold of this, try to get a piece of it where I can twist it off back to that point where I cut it. That's what's happening right now. If you let the bark dry out before you do this, if you cut off the branch and then let the bark dry out, it's very, very difficult to get that bark to come off at that point. It's much, much easier to do it now while the bark is wet. Okay? Now that doesn't look too good. It looks like somebody cut it right there, which is exactly how it happened. Here's how we handle that. I take my cutter and I'm going to cut partially through it, like so. Then I'm going to take the pair of pliers and I'm going to break that off in a way that will look more natural, as if it broke off in a storm. That's what we're looking at. I have to encourage that a little bit more with the cutters. I just don't want to have a blunt cut like you get when you prune, because the idea is not that somebody came along and pruned this branch off. Remember, we're telling a story, and the idea is that on some stormy occasion, this limb ripped off and part of it remains. That's what we have here. Okay, let's have a look. It's a very good idea when you're doing this work to occasionally step back and get a different view of it. You know, you're working up in it and it's right up close in front of you. It's good to step back, have a look. The turntable allows us to turn it around so that we can see it from all different angles. Check it out. I feel very good about this move, which is a fortunate thing because once you take it off, you can't put it back on. So you better be very certain when you make a move like that. And I feel very relieved that that worked out well. The next thing I want to do now is start wiring the branches. The wiring is an essential thing. It's not the easiest thing, but like many other technical things, when you practice it, proficiency comes, and then it comes more quickly, more easily. To start with, wiring can be quite a chore and not exactly the most pleasurable thing. One thing for sure, it's not much of a spectator sport, but when you're doing it, it can be kind of contemplative and enjoyable in that way. One of the main things you need to do in wiring is to pick the right gauge of wire to use. The wire has to be strong enough to hold the branch that you're putting it on. One way I like to test that is I'll take a piece of wire that I intend to use, and I'll hold about 1 inch, 2 inches or so out beyond my fingers, and then I'll go and I'll press on the branch that I intend to wire. And if the branch bends and the wire remains rigid, then I know I have a strong enough gauge. If, on the other hand, the wire were to bend and the branch not move, then I know that wire is not strong enough. After a while, you get a sense of what will work. You have to estimate how much wire you'll need for a given stretch that you intend to wire. Here, what I'm working on is this crotch right here. It has 2 segments, one going this way, one going this way. I'll use one wire to wire them both. And what I'll do is I'll start right there, right at the point where they come together. Using my forefinger as a guide, I'll wrap the wire around. It needs to be snug, but we don't want it to be too tight. If it's too tight, it can start biting in immediately on the branch. Remember, this wire can only stay on so long as it's not biting into the branch. It needs to be firm in order to hold the branch that you're applying it to, but it can't be too firm that you're not able to keep it on there for very long. I'm wrapping around in roughly 45-degree circles, spirals. I try to keep it close. I try not to trap any foliage underneath my wiring. And when I get to a point like right here, where the wire is actually the same size as the branch, it started at one size, but then the branch diminished. Now I'm not going to try to wrap that wire around that little piece because I could damage it. I'll just snip off the extra. Now I go back to where I left off on the other side, and careful not to hurt that little piece there. I continue wrapping around until I've brought it all the way out as far as I can go. I might need the pliers just to twist off that last little bit at the end. Now with the wire, I can change where that branch is, and you'll see it stay put. If I want it down low like that, I can do it. If I want it to lay flat or come upward, I can do it, and the wire will hold it there. But remember, it's only there for a short duration, and what we want to do is have the branch set in that position. We're on the last piece of wire right now. I got one little branch up here that I want to finish. We've been working on wiring this tree for the past, I'd say, hour and a half, 2 hours. And really, there are not so many limbs on this tree. There are trees that take a lot longer than that. So it's a very labor-intensive, time-intensive job. But what it allows is for you to have complete control over the placement of every single branch on the tree. And so up here where we're a little thin, I'm cheating a little bit. I'm bending the top forward. I'm kind of splaying out the branches that are there to give the illusion of fullness. From the front anyway, remember this is the front of our tree right here, so that's how the viewer will see it. If you look from the side, you can see it's a little thin. I can't do anything about that now. We'll grow that over time and it will fill in. Okay, at this point, we're ready to go ahead and repot the tree. It's been in here a long time, so we take our root sickle and we work around the edge to free it up. I've already cut the wires that held it into the pot. I have to be careful grabbing this now because I don't want to damage that nice old bark. And we lift it out of the container. And here we've got a nice root mass. We're going to go into a new container. This is a nice hand-built American-made container. It has drainage holes, and we've got those holes covered up with plastic screening to keep the medium from running out. And we've got wires already positioned in the pot, and those we'll use to hold the plant down when we put it in here. Okay, now we've loosened that root ball up, and look at how many roots were packed into the bottom of that pot. This plant really needed repotting, so it's a good thing that we're doing this at this time. I take my old shears. I'm not going to use my good ones because cutting rocks and grit is not good for the scissors, and I'll begin to cut these off now, trimming them all the way back. I'm ready to go into the pot. I've got a nice mound of soil waiting in there. I've trimmed this root ball out. You see it's a nice, flat, well-developed root ball. You see all these fine roots. We took a lot off, but that's what we needed to do to put it back in this pot so it can begin to grow again. Now, I look for what I think might be a good front on this container, because the pots have fronts just like the trees do. And then I'll settle it in the container, and what I'm looking for is a different attitude. I want the plant to stand up differently. Before it was leaning over like so. I want it to stand up now. And that's what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to strap it in using these wires. And that about finishes it off. We've got the plant in the pot. We've stood it up at a slightly different angle. We've put our soil in and worked it around the roots. Everything went really well. It took a bit of doing, especially all the wiring, but everything went very well, and I'm so pleased with the way that this tree has turned out. It's a subtle change in some respects, dramatic maybe in the loss of this branch, but everything else is kind of a refinement, tightening the tree up. I'm so pleased at the way it turned out. Really looks good. Now I'll have to make sure it's watered in well, and then for the next couple of weeks, I won't put it out in the full sun. We'll kind of baby it a little bit till we're sure it's made the transition. But I've enjoyed doing this workshop. I hope you've enjoyed watching.
Funding for this program is made possible in part by UNC-TV members.